There is only one America. No Democratic rivers. No Republican mountains. Just this great land and all that's possible on it, with a fresh start. Cures we can find. Futures we can shape. Work to reward. Dignity to protect. There is so much we can do if we choose to take on problems and not each other, and choose a president who brings out our best. Joe Biden doesn't need everyone in this country to always agree. Just to agree we all love this country and go from there.
All right, so
I'm
that
Joe
was
Biden.
part of the many Joe Biden ads in the run-up to yesterday's election. And now we are seeing the results coming in. Very many media houses coming in with the results and also reporting. We are monitoring a number of them. We're reporting CNN. We know how CNN is leaning. That is towards the Joe Biden side. And then we also are monitoring Fox News, and we know where Fox leans. In fact, just watching Fox News, you wonder, are the Democrats in this race at all? You know, it's all the Republicans. So the numbers that have come in so far and how it's been reported, you know, looking at only the number of states that have been reported, appears that it's a closely contested race still, with the electoral college votes. That's the most important bit. Looking for the winning candidate to get 270 electoral college votes from this election. What is being reported for Biden so far is, what was it? I saw it earlier on the screen. It was about...
we're at 98.
Yep.
So it was 98
on
to
CNN,
95.
133 on Fox News. So still, yes, there you go. On Fox News, they're saying 207 for Biden, 119 for Trump.
Still a ways to go, though.
Yep.
In terms of counting those
Quite a
numbers
number.
and seeing where things are going. Of course, being called the race to 270, when you're looking at just over 530 electoral college votes that would be counted on the night. So whoever would get to 270 plus one is what is being looked at now. I think a lot of people are finding it difficult to reconcile with those numbers. And why 270? What does that exactly mean? But it's still some. If Biden were to get there, you're still looking at him getting at least 63 more votes in this. 64. If he were to get 64, that's where he would be with these numbers. Okay?
You know what is actually interesting when you look at the U.S. election? It has also caught the imagination of the rest of the world. It's not just an American thing. Now, there's a certain division of business in the UK that has actually been lit up by these elections. The gaming industry, the betting industry. And if I were to go by a report and the discussion that was on BBC, the business segment of it, over 300 million US, so British pounds equivalent, has actually featured in this particular election. You have people putting or betting in as much as $1 million, some $5 million on specific people to win, something that was unprecedented, something that they haven't seen.
Yep.
Meaning, when you have that particular industry beginning to participate in election, in the US, from what I heard and from what I've then consequently read, you cannot bet on an election. They don't allow it. But in the UK, you can. Now, what this tells you is this. It has been considered a sport. It is not different from a football match. It is not different from a horse race. It is not different from a cockfight. It's not different from the many, many things that people like to bet on.
It's a race, it's a competition.
Thank you. That is precisely what it is. But it's a big one. What I wondered as I was listening to this and as I later read was, why would somebody want to bet? Then I figured, wait, no. Someone who takes themselves seriously as a gambler, it's a gamble.
Yeah.
They like to gamble. They've hedged their bets. They've figured it out. They've looked at it. And they figured, you know what?
It is a very clear thing. There's got to be an outcome.
There
and
is
a
going
winner.
to be an outcome, and a clear outcome.
And a clear winner being announced at some point. So place a bet. Someone will just keep saying, let's bet.
You actually put it very simply. Place a bet.
Just place your bet and see who takes it. The other thing that's quite emerging about this is, number one, and we discussed this earlier, the record number of people who have turned out to vote in this particular election. Then second thing is, even the people who were voting before election date, over 100 million people had voted. 100 million people had voted before the election date. Here we struggle with 17 million people. In this country,
struggle.
17 million people, voter register, you don't know where who has the register, who has a black book, are we using the online? We have issues. Voter identification and verification, going there and finding your name on a list to know which stream you are and what's there for what queue you should join.
You
All
actually
those are
told you're
issues
not registered in that constituency.
Yes. You're not a voter here. You need to be
Simple.
a voter. These guys, 100 million voted.
That's already a
by
third of
mail.
their population
Voted by
via mail.
And now here we are now. People were queuing yesterday to vote, and you've seen no issues. The other thing that also emerged in this election is the way we're seeing businesses boarding up. They are anticipating post-election violence of some sort, some skirmishes here and there, to the extent that the Republican Party has actually moved its monitoring and party from Washington to some undisclosed location because they're anticipating
Violence.
some skirmishes and
Insecurity
violence.
issues.
Yes.
For them to anticipate it means they have information.
They have
Sure.
proper
By
intelligence
the
that
time they're
tells
doing
them
that, intelligence
this
has
thing
informed that
is
decision.
there.
Alongside that, both sides have actually ensured that they've gathered the legal expertise that they require.
Ready for
They are waiting for
any
back.
eventuality.
Yes, they're waiting. to
However
see.
it goes.
Yes, they have them ready and they're prepped and they're waiting.
There are very many things that are emerging. Like you said, there are very many countries and people around the world that are also there for watching this election. There are those that are watching the election to see lessons to learn, how you mobilize voters, how you make sure that people come out. Is it on issue basis? Is it on using just some sentiment that whips up people's emotion? However, people come out to vote. And if you just observe in the last 12 years, with Obama 1, Obama 2, and now Trump 1, and now this one, Trump 2, we're seeing the same. It's about get the people out to vote. Rally people to turn up to vote. Turn out the vote was the Obama clarion call. Same thing with Hillary last time and Trump as well. Same thing has happened now, and the numbers have kept rising. One good observation.
You know what is also interesting about the numbers rising? You're not really sure where they're going to vote, do you? Because if you listen, for instance, to the discussions that voters in America have, the thing that strikes me is that people have predetermined positions which they are very unlikely to change in many cases. Now, they will vote for whoever they want to vote for, and whatever else is said, they will reason and they'll use that information to support the candidate of choice.
Yep.
There are those who will vote for a president because they believe this person is a man of God.
Right.
Now, that one caught my attention. And I thought, so when someone talks God, or when someone is anti-something that people who believe they are godly people, believe in or don't believe in, that is their candidate. Everything else is not considered.
It doesn't matter.
No.
Come in.
And then there's the historical aspect. There are people who, from time immemorial, have fathers, grandfathers who have believed in a particular party because that party has represented the disenfranchised or in that community, and that isn't changing. Now, what I find, I'm saying it's interesting because
Yep.
they also have a youthful population.
Yep.
But those views are held sacrosanct. But there is something that is interesting in many of these, especially in some of the bigger towns, that the people they seem to find who are willing to change their perspective are women who are in employment, middle class, and hold certain jobs. They are willing to look at this thing and say, no, I'm not moving from the party, but this particular person here doesn't represent those values that I particularly like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I'd like to see is when those postal votes start being counted, what exactly it'll demonstrate. Because that, my friend, is a picture that we are not able to see clearly. As yet.
So are you saying that the counties and the states that are already announcing the results, for example, the ones that we are seeing, Florida right now on the screen on Fox News, Biden 5.2 million, Trump 5.6 million, and already Fox News is expectedly calling it for Trump in that and saying he's taken the 29 electoral college votes. Are you saying that those 10 million plus are not inclusive of the postal?
I'm saying I don't know.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. other interesting thing that has emerged out of this campaign is when you see Americans fearful of the violence and see the violence leading up to this, the kind of back and forth that they had, is what if this was another country somewhere in Africa? What would Americans be saying?
Pause.
What would the news outlets, all these news outlets in unison, be reporting?
Why did you just pause even before they started boarding up and having their legal minds together? Just think about the utterances, all right, that have been made. Think of any country on this lovely continent of Africa. My friend, the things that would have been said, the first word to feature would be tribal.
Kabisa.
And condone.
Yes.
And despots.
And then a history
What
of
let's not
an
even
anti-democratic.
let's not go very far. Tanzania
Tanzania.
voted last week.
Yep.
There were eruptions of violence even before the vote. And we heard calls from the same United States, their resident ambassador, saying things about calling off, it's unnecessary for this security. The trend of politics in Africa needs to change.
Yeah.
These are the words that we heard last week. Calling, and then after calling for the release of certain individuals then who had been arrested as a result of some of the protests that take place. Again, a clarion call for the elections on the continent of Africa to be seen as free and fair. Already.
Imagine, already. So we want to discuss how this American election is shaping out, and then if this American election, the way it's happening, if it was happening in another country that's not in America, let's say in Africa, how the media would have covered it, how the American government would have reacted. And we're bringing our guest, who's a cartoonist, blogger, and author, Patrick Gathara. Just before that, this is what Patrick had tweeted 2 days ago. Polls are set to open in 48 hours across the U.S. as the authoritarian regime of Donald Trump attempts to consolidate its hold over the troubled, oil-rich, nuclear-armed North American nation. Analysts are skeptical that the election will end months of political violence. Breaking news, African envoys have called for Americans to maintain peace during the elections and to be prepared, accept the outcome of the vote. In a joint statement, the diplomats condemned recent incidents of incitement, violence, and intimidation directed at opposition supporters. This is something that you would have completely expected. Another one, breaking news. A team of African election observers led by the famed explorer Milton Alimadi, who discovered the Gulu River in Europe, is en route to the seaside capital of Washington, D.C., where they are expected to separately meet with Mr. Trump and opposition candidate Joe Biden. Alimadi, head of the African Election Observer Group, urged U.S. media to be responsible in its reporting and take care not to inflame the already tense situation. We urge American journalists to preach the gospel of peace and acceptance of election results. It just sounds like a script that you have already read somewhere.
I've already heard
it's
on
already something that you've heard
many,
on very many
occasions.
occasions.
There's one little thing that he should have also mentioned, that the election, the voting process in the entire U.S. were by and large peaceful.
Yes.
People went about their business, and we commend the American people for conducting a peaceful election.
They'd have mentioned something else, that there is likelihood of interference from foreign countries. For example, China's increasing influence in the continent, or Russia's also increasing influence in the continent, and what that could mean to this sovereignty of this country, and especially its postal system, that it's still archaic. Patrick Gathara, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the show, brother. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back. It's been a long time.
It has been a while. Just looking at what was going through your mind as you were tweeting that the other day. I mean, it's just proper satire, and looking at this is exactly how the script would have flipped if this election was happening elsewhere. This is what we'd be hearing from America, from American media, from American government, from American senior politicians and observers. Do you think that was really fair, or just taking a jibe at them? And really, their situation is not like we've seen in Africa.
Well, I think that first, it is sort of a jibe at them. It is a way of getting back at them. As you've noted, this is how we are covered. This is the language that is used to cover elections, not just in Kenya, but also across Africa, across Asia, across Latin America. All these adjectives like oil-rich country, you never hear them applied to Western countries. It's always just either Saudi Arabia or Nigeria or something like that. And so it's really important, I think, for us to interrogate the language that is used to cover this. And part of the reason I was doing this, not the first time I'm doing this. I ran a thread on the Brexit crisis using the same, using a similar case, and then the BLM protests early in the U.S. But I think for me it's really important to flip the language and to interrogate why are these terms used when it comes to us. Why is this sort of push for accept election results? Or have credible elections, as if elections in the U.S. by default are
credible. Yes.
And then I think it's far from certain the U.S. system delivers credible, free and fair elections.
Indeed, and I mean this is what we see all the time. For example, Alassane Ouattara has just been declared winner of the election in Ivory Coast. And what's reporting in the global media looking like? Oh, he forced his way in. Right?
He forced his way into a third term and was going to force it on the likes of the people to be able to come in, whether it was constitutionally sound or not, whether it was actually the will of the people, and whether the people coming out into the streets of Côte d'Ivoire earlier on, asking that somebody else come in and take the reins of power, was actually listened to. And that again, it would be that the call that came out of a lot of Western nations was that, it was necessary for the people of Ivory Coast to at least have been seen to be part of the process. And again, calling for a footprint of free and fair elections in the country. Oh, yes.
People of the Ivory Coast.
To be seen to have been part of the process.
Yes.
Okay. This was supposed to manifest itself how exactly?
To continue to urge African nations to do this. To continue to urge African nations, like what you see happening in the United States now. It's very clear that
to follow in their footsteps, in other words.
It's very clear that the results that we are seeing now coming out of the presidential election is that the people actually sought out and met their constitutional and civic rights and duties by going out to vote. And the only result that you're seeing is that of the voting of the people. Nothing else. No kind of electoral fraud or misconduct having taken place. This is actually the result of the people voting.
But this conversation, unfortunately, in the U.S. has not been that. It has been spoken of very loud in the president's camp. This postal system has been attacked and attacked and attacked. It has been called anything that... Let me sum it up. It has been called fraudulent, for lack of a better word. So really, where then does fairness come in? Because it's like saying you're predicating an outcome by saying that because of what I am saying, I'm not going to accept. Essentially, a position has been taken. I will not accept.
For 4 years, we saw the Republicans refusing to accept that Donald Trump fairly won that election.
Yes.
For 4 years, the
Democrats.
Democrats, sorry.
Yes.
The issue, the conversation in America surrounding the election of 4 years ago was, it had been tampered with. There was foreign interference and influence, that Donald Trump was a puppet of this particular win and the entire campaign. That is what was an issue. Can you imagine if this was in another country? Can you imagine if it was in another country and not America, and there were all these concerns about whether that election had been tampered with by a third country? What kind of push would there have been? This is a president who imposed himself on the people. This is a president who was planted by some other foreign forces. The opposition candidate Hillary Clinton would have been the Western recognized president of that country. Because
for all you know, Hillary Clinton may have been sworn in as the people's president.
Yep. And this is what Gathara is saying. You've been raising this. I mean, you wanted just to flip it and see this kind of narrative. When it comes out in other parts of the world, it takes a different slant. It's the same messaging, but if it's in the United States, then it's a different conversation altogether.
Right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I think there is a trend to a sense in which these things are flipped. But I think we should also be a bit careful about looking at elections, for example, in Tanzania and Cote d'Ivoire, and saying simply because they have problems in the U.S. and these ones are good. I think it's a flip of what the U.S. does.
Yep.
So we've got to admit that there are problems with certain elections in Africa. It's not that all African elections are problematic. In fact, I would argue that lots of elections in Africa are much better than the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And that the U.S. has quite a lot to learn by looking at how elections are run in places like Ghana, and that deliver credible outcomes that are respected by people. When it comes to some of the things that, ironically, the U.S. has been pushing to happen on the continent, from having uniform voter rolls, from having credible election monitoring commission. These things don't exist in the U.S. And then part of the problem that you have, part of the reason Trump, for example, is able to raise issues with aspects of the election is because they are not uniform. It depends on which state you're in. Some states will be counting these votes 3 days from now, others 9 days from now, others will count it today. So it's quite confusing. And I think the U.S. needs to re-examine its own system and understand that it's not what it has been portraying itself to be, the shining city on a hill, the paragon of democracy. It is not. As they have focused on democracy in other places, they have forgotten about democracy in their own country. They have a system that has encouraged an authoritarian to take on. To have for public officials to be unaccountable. And at the same time, they're talking to us about accountability. So I think it's time they stop preaching water and drinking water.
We're speaking with Patrick Gathara. He's a cartoonist, he's a blogger, he's an author. We are looking at the American election. The results are coming in, being reported by various international news outlets and also local news outlets in the States. Seeing what already is coming out in some areas, it looks like a very closely contested race. So, for example, Fox News saying that Biden has taken Arizona and therefore taken the electoral college votes there. The race is for 270 electoral college votes. So far saying Biden has 218 and Trump 148. So how is it going? How is it going to pan out? This is a conversation that we're having right here on Spice FM and KTN Home and Online.
For too long, Washington flourished, politicians prospered, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. That all changes starting right here and right now. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. It's going to be only America first. Buy American and hire American. No challenge can match the heart and fight and spirit of America. We will not fail. Our country will thrive and prosper again. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. We will be protected by the great men and women of our military and law enforcement. We will bring back our jobs. We will bring back our borders. We will bring back our wealth. And we will bring back our dreams. We will face challenges. We will confront hardships. But we will get the job done. Together, we will determine the course of America and the world for many, many.
It was brilliant.
Run up to this election.
It was brilliant. It was a brilliant ad for sure.
Very well worded, right?
Yes.
I liked it. I like the part where he's speaking to the people as though he's not the president.
In fact, at some point I wondered, was this the 2016
Still
ad,
campaign?
or was it,
Yes.
or was it a 2020 ad?
You get the impression, yes.
Yeah.
It's like this government is really not for you. They don't seem to.
They don't connect with what
They
you're
don't
saying.
connect with what-
It's not what you.
Well,
yes, Gathara.
I think it's taken from his inauguration speech.
Yeah.
The art.
Yeah, actually, yes. That's exactly it. That was a point when he was now promising, I am taking over. This is what we're going to do. All right. So the election so far, according to CNN, the results, CNN is already calling it 192 electoral college votes for Biden, 114 for Trump. Looking at the results as they've been coming in, Gathara, so far this morning, and even the voting process itself, the conduct of the election itself so far, what do you make of it?
Well, I think it's very familiar, at least to me. It looks very much like a Kenyan election, I have to say. Although I've got to caution people, because lots of people have been saying that this is America's African election, and as we said before, many African elections are run better than the U.S. one. But still, this looks familiar. Where you remember in Kenya, we've always had this really strong turnout on voting day, very peaceful voting day, and the problems come when they start counting and tallying. And I think that is kind of similar to what we are seeing now. Also, remember in our elections, we have these waves where perhaps one candidate starts off, is winning, is leading, and then there is a wave that comes later that kind of sweeps him aside or something like that. That's happened in 2007, and that can be a cause for people to start claiming fraud or going onto the streets to demonstrate. I think the U.S. might be looking at something similar, where, and they've been warned about this, that there's lots of votes that are yet to be counted, and people will build up leads, and there might be an idea that, remember Trump was saying that everything should be counted by the end of today.
Yeah.
Yet, even in previous elections, counting has gone on for 1 or 2 days. So there might be a call, but if it's a very close election, you might not know the winner today.
Yeah.
So if somebody decides to make a premature call, and that was a fear, that either one of the aligned news stations might decide to make a unilateral call, of who has won the election, or you might have a difference between media houses about who has won what, and that might inspire people to dispute the election and perhaps violence. So I think they have to be, just to finish, I think they've got to be more patient. I think we've got to wait. People will build up a lead, etc., but I think it's very advisable to wait until pretty much most of the vote is in.
Why do you think this is happening in this particular election in a way that you have never seen it happen in the US before? And I'm talking specifically about the calls that if things do not go in a preferred way, if things don't come out in the preferred choice, then you would see this result of essentially protests, right? Again, which could give rise to the reasons why many people have said an African election taking place in the United States. Because, this is some of the things that we have we have been used to rather, whereas somebody is not happy with the results, what you essentially ask for is some protests of some kind. We've never really seen it taking place in the United States before. Why do you think this has come out at this point in the manner in which it is happening?
Well, you've had a disputed presidential election in the U.S. before.
Yes, but before the result, before the result has even come out, there have been calls for this, that if the result comes out, we would not be accepting of such. That you've not seen in a manner in which you've seen it now.
I think I haven't heard, at least personally, that, sure, Trump was saying that there cannot be a credible election where he does not win. But I think he has kind of walked back that rhetoric. Today, he was interviewed, I watched it on CNN, and he was saying that it's a close fight, that winning might be difficult. So he's actually giving room for the fact that he might lose.
Is he really?
So yes, I think there is a bit of walking back of the sort of bombastic rhetoric. You remember there was even a suggestion that he might declare victory even before he got to 270 electoral votes.
I think it wasn't even a suggestion, Gathara. I think he came right out and said that's exactly what he would do.
No, actually, he didn't.
He
He
did
actually
that.
denied the report. Did
he say that like on video? Like there's video?
No,
was
it wasn't on
reported.
video.
It was reported that this is what he said.
That's it.
It
It's
was
reported.
somebody who was part of his campaign who, so basically a leak from his campaign. Somebody had suggested that's what was going to happen.
Yes.
But he's walked that back. I think that pretty much there is an expectation that when a call is made, people will accept it. Now,
Sure.
the issue, I think, is with litigation. If this goes beyond today, and Trump has said that he is going to litigate it, and he is, during the campaigns, has spoken of the Supreme Court basically as his trump card, if you'll pardon the pun.
Sure.
I think that's where there might be an issue. If people start contesting votes in particular areas, if it gets up to the Supreme Court, then there will be a question as to whether that court can rule credibly, whether people will believe what it says. You remember in the 2000 election, they gave a really weird ruling. Basically, they stopped the recount in Florida.
Yep.
And they said that their ruling was not any sort of precedent that other courts should use, which was really, really strange. So I think that whether or not the Supreme Court is going to be believed if it rules in Trump's favor, assuming this goes to litigation, will be the linchpin. And I think they might end up in a situation as we did here in Kenya in the 2013 election, where the Supreme Court essentially undermined its own authority by being seen to be unable to stand up to the executive.
Are we looking at a time where it could be now a globally accepted thing that the almighty United States goes through the same electoral process problems as other countries on the globe?
Yes, I think we're already there. I think people have already seen in the last 4 years that the U.S. is not any sort of, how do I put it, a paragon of democracy. That it is a country like any other. It's got its problems like any other. And I think even its moral authority to kind of preach to other countries has been severely undermined. So we are there. And I think we need to think about this in the context of the international system, because the system we have today was built by the U.S. and it is predicated on the U.S. being this sort of central nation, and I think this raises questions about what happens when it is not there, when it doesn't occupy that space. In fact, when people were talking about the possibility of violence, I think it's receded somewhat now. There was a question about what happens when you don't have the U.S. as kind of the linchpin state, when it goes into electoral problems, when it goes into violence. Do we have that can contain that? Given it's got a veto at the UN, are we going to be talking about sending peacekeepers to the U.S.? It's got the biggest military
I
on
don't
the
think
world.
it may get to that. I don't think it may get to
No, I'm
that,
not saying
Mr.
it's going
Gathara.
to.
But the
I'm
truth
not
of the
saying it's
matter
going
is that the U.S. has represented a civilization that is in decline. That is my view. And with civilizations, when they decline, or with the powers of nation when they decline, you do see the breaking up of norms that had been considered not just sacrosanct, but things that would last the test of time. Unfortunately, they never do. Now, anything that is uttered by a leader like, say, the president, you've said that he's walked back on it, but the effect has already taken place. Because he has said it, he walked back on issues of the mask. He wore it and then threw it out. There are many things Trump has consistently said things which are inflammatory and then walked back on it. His followers, I don't think, even pay attention to the walking back. They pay attention to what appeals to them. And so, if there is damage that we can claim has been done, in my opinion, damage has already been done.
Yeah, I completely agree that the damage has been done. My question was whether or not Trump would refuse to accept an election that is declared, assuming, let's say, Biden today gets to 270. I think unless there is an actual court dispute, litigation about some votes, I think you're going to see one of the candidates concede. But still, I would accept that, yes, there has been damage to the status of the U.S. And my question is, how does the international system cope with this? And again, we've got to ourselves ask, who replaces the U.S.? If it is China or if it is Russia or some other country, is that good for us, for countries like ours, or is that bad? And I think we need to figure this out. We need to have a discussion about how the international system itself works and the things that it is predicated on, and to understand, as Muga says, these are things that can change. And when they change, what should we do about it?
And where like will that saying, Patrick, that the world then should be working together to shore up this democracy that's the United States, because if we help it to stay afloat, then it's good for the world.
Well, not exactly. I'm saying that yes, I do think that we should help the U.S. with its democracy, because I think democracy is fundamentally a good thing. But the way the world is structured, with the U.S. as they call it, the indispensable nation, is problematic. And I think this is the extension, if you will, of the discussion on the Black Lives Matter movement. Because in the U.S. they're saying that when you have this system where whites are on top and blacks are below, and it is systematically enforced, that's a problem. But in the international stage, you have the very exact same system, and these whites who are on top are essentially the Western world, and the system operates on the predicate that these countries will always be on top. They are the developed ones. We are developing to be like them.
But Mr. Gathara, the laws don't actually state that. The laws are actually non-partisan. If you look at most laws, it's the practice that we see that raises the alarm in most cases.
I would disagree. I think
please disagree.
The way the systems are put up, the laws we have, at least that control the international space, the rules that we have on the international space, seems to be applied not in a nonpartisan
Precisely.
way.
For example, the application of it.
Right. And if you look at how easily countries like the U.S. can escape the rules, let me give you an example. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty stops the rest of us getting nuclear weapons. But it includes a clause that the countries that have nuclear weapons should be getting rid of them. But you never hear them talk about that clause. That's not implemented. That is ignored. So we've got to relook at that law and at that rule and ask, why should we be the ones who are sticking by it if they are not going to keep up their end? And it's the same way if you look at WTO and how the rules work and how Africa is always relegated to this space where we are unable to export finished goods.
But would you say that the US here owns the piper, really owns, not so they can call the tune? For the longest time, they've been the country that is known to always give out aid. They when it comes to research, they fund more than anybody else. They've taken a key position in actually being big brother to the rest of the world. They send their armies in places that have problems. This is something they've done more than anybody else has done.
Right.
So when you're in such a position, often you will see accompanying this dictatorial tendencies. And this didn't begin yesterday, telling you this is what you must do.
All right. But when those things, when their status starts to change, then let's have that conversation.
But that's the beauty of the conversation. We're actually having it because then we don't help, we learn. These are systems made by people, by human beings, to serve a purpose for a particular period of time, and sometimes they don't.
So I guess then the way in which it should be going, the direction should we be taking now? I think there are two fronts. I think there's just not one thing that you look at. So there's the side of saying the world has been looking at the United States, Gathara, as this leader for the longest period of time. Now, if things are starting to crack or things are starting to burst open at the seams, who then do we look to? Who's going to take this leadership position? Number one.
Must we look for leaders?
Number one. And then on the other side of the conversation, then is, should we always then look to one person or one group who is going to lead the world? And why can it not be that everybody then is learning from things that we've seen in the past in terms of who to look up to, even if it is yourselves?
If you don't have a leader, then what do you have?
I think these are two sides of it that we can look at.
If you don't have a leader, what do you have?
I think you also have to think about the way the national system works, and it's in essence an anarchic space. It is not run according to sort of there's one set authority that polices things. So countries act according to their interests. They can ignore international law when it suits them and when they can get away with it. That's why the U.S. is not bound by any of this, as Muga has pointed out. So if we start thinking of running the international space the way we run states, so there is authorities that we empower to take certain decisions, and that everybody is bound by the same rules, then that might change.
This one world rule may not necessarily happen in my lifetime, Gathara,
exactly,
but it's a lovely idea, though.
Which one?
What he's suggesting, you see, the
have
UN,
a global parliament.
Yes, the UN is supposed to serve that purpose.
Which unfortunately
the incidences that we've seen on this planet, which we have brought on ourselves, led to this. League of Nations, then the United Nations. But if you look at the leaders, the countries that we consider to be powerful countries, it's because they have grown internally mechanisms, systems that ensure that they can look after their own, and in doing that, they even have an abundance which they can share with others.
Sure, and just on that point, because again, Gathara, a lot of these countries who you look at as being world leaders, they seemed to have gotten it right in terms of economic development, for example, within their borders before they can then go outside and do this.
But this is where I would dispute it. Lots of the countries that are up there are colonial countries, are countries that benefited from oppressing other peoples, that took things from other countries, from other regions of the world. So it's not the fact that they are better custodians of the economies, etc. They simply are better robbers. And I think,
but they also know how to keep whatever it is they've paid for it, don't they?
Sure, they've been able to develop it well. We have people who've stolen on this side of the pond, but have not been able to keep it at all.
Well, the truth is, if you look at the scale at which the theft was perpetrated and the time that the length of time that it was done, I mean, it's nowhere comparable with what has happened within here. And then don't forget who it's being taken from. These countries, such as ours, that are suffering, are the ones that were being robbed. So
actually, it isn't past tense, Mr. Gathara. We are still being robbed.
Yeah, we're still being robbed. That's true.
And then that's testament then to the powers of those countries.
And that's why when I talk about having a discussion about the international system, is to recognize some of these things that are still going on, some of the colonial extractive systems that the international system we have today, whether it's trade or even aid, etc., is built on. So if you look at Africa, for example, the amount of money that is taken out of Africa is tiny compared to what they give us back as aid. But yet we are told it.
Therein lies the problem. This dependency on other people helping us solve our problems, as though we are completely incapable of solving problems, which we ought to know about because we create them for ourselves.
Again, I would dispute the idea that we create them for ourselves. We have found lots of these systems there. And don't forget, we were put into an international system that set us up to be primary producers for the economies in Europe. That is what we have continued to be.
And are we shackled to this? We don't have any opportunity to get out of this?
We are shackled. We are very shackled. When you look at what people like Lumumba, when they started talking about undoing this system, what happened to them, that tells you that you're shackled. When you look at what France does, with countries in West Africa, it tells you that you're shackled.
And there's no way of getting out of this shackle. That's what I'm asking. Well, there is no way we're making a conscious decision or effort to say that we are seeing the situation in which we are in. We can continue saying that we're put in a system like this, or we can now go about making moves to change what it is that we see, or continually singing this lullaby about being shackled and staying in that position without making any moves to get out of it.
Now, recognizing that the system exists, that is not saying that we can't get out. But the first thing we need to do is to recognize it, is to understand what it is we are trying to get out from under. Unfortunately, the way we are set up today, we kind of keep replicating the mistakes that were made before. And there is real reluctance because you do have people who win. So Nyerere said that the moment you've got a multiplication of people with motorcades, 6-gun salutes, etc., you're not going to get unity in Africa because those people already have an interest in keeping it divided.
Yeah.
And we've got, at a continental level, elites who have an interest in keeping things as they are because they earn a lot by doing that. So what we have in countries is a microcosm of what's happening across the continent. And I think until we sit down and we say, how do we start true, proper decolonization? How do we get out of the colonial system that was imposed on us and that continues still today to extract from us? And until we have that conversation, everything else is window dressing. And unfortunately, our politicians are very good at distracting us with other discussions other than the one we really need to have.
You really hold on to this, Gathara. Every time you have a conversation, you will always veer towards that. The extractive system that was imposed on us.
But it's the truth. That is what is there. And we keep running away from it.
A very valid one.
It's a very strong point, yes. Whether everybody
but it isn't
agrees
the
to
only
that.
game.
Yes.
Yes.
Gathara, thank you very much for speaking to us today. And we will invite you again to have more and more conversations. Always a pleasure having you.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you.